Hi, I'm Dr. George Yancey. Let's share some paradigms. And the paradigm I want to share today is ignoring Nigeria. One of the things that has happened over the past couple of years is that there's been a lot of attention on Israel and Palestine, deservedly so. But while this has been occurring, there's been religious persecution in Nigeria. There's no doubt about that. This year, 7,000 Christians in Nigeria have been killed. And, there's been a variety of different ways this has occurred. For the past 20 years or so, I believe, like about 50,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria. I may be off my numbers. Too many Christians have been killed in Nigeria. And while there is some violence the other way towards Muslims, it's been mostly Christians who have been victimized in Nigeria. And it's very sad. And Boko Haram and other non-state actors have been burning churches, have been slaughtering Christians, and the government does not help very much. Turn a blind eye. Treats Christians as second-class citizens. Now, I'm not pointing all this out because I'm a Christian. I would point this out. I've been critical of the Uyghurs situation in China. Maybe not on a video because when that was more the news, I didn't have this channel. But yes, I'm concerned anytime there's religious persecution. The question I want to ask is, why does it get so little attention? I barely ever hear the Trump administration talk about Nigeria. And the one thing I will, I've criticized the Trump administration decently on these channels, but one thing I will say is that they have been concerned about trying to end wars. But I've heard them talk about this war. Maybe they're doing something I just don't know about it. Doesn't get people's attention. People are not protesting this. Why not? And you could argue that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is more central, more important, more people have been killed, and that's fair. But what's not fair is that this gets almost no attention. The news, when I watch the news, I hardly ever hear about what's happening in Nigeria. I've only learned from some of my friends who've been very concerned on social media. It's made me look into this situation. And I ask, why is this not getting attention? I think that's a fair question given the death and the persecution that's happening. I have 3 reasons why I think this is not getting attention. And they don't look well on us, but I think I want to articulate them. Before I do, let me just say that I hope you enjoy some of my channel, and maybe this is the first time you've heard me. If you like the way I'm approaching things, then please consider subscribing or dropping a like or a comment. If you disagree, drop a comment as well. I'll just tell you that my goal on this channel is to create a space for Christians who are not comfortable in the left or the right, but want to think critically with nuance about the situations that are ahead. And as you're going to see in the rest of this channel, some of my reasons seem to not make the right look too good, and others not make the left look too good, because I believe my faith is beyond left and right. And if you do too, maybe you want to be a part of this community. Hopefully we can build a community here. Okay, so why is Nigeria largely ignored? Here's my first reason. The people being killed are largely black. They're Africans. And there is a sad history in Western society of ignoring the death of African Americans, of Africans. And I'm not just talking about back in the slavery or Jim Crow. You'll note that when a news show does a special about a missing woman, it's usually a European American woman. Although African American women are also missing, and sometimes at higher rates than European American women. You'll notice that the attention often is on the deaths of whites. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, no, I'm not racist. And I'm not saying that there's a sort of an intentional racism. There may be. But there does seem to be a little ignoring the fate of blacks. And I think that may play a role. that if this was, say, Yugoslavia, and 7,000 of them had died this past year, these white Yugoslavians, my suspicion is that more attention would be paid to it. So I do fear that the victims, the race of the victims, is playing a role in this. Second reason, the religion of the victims. I think it's an interesting thing. Sometimes Christians themselves don't pay attention to the persecution of other Christians. Much less non-Christians pay attention to the persecution of other Christians. Especially here in the United States, where those with cultural power are more likely to have Christianophobia. And so the death of Christians does not weigh as heavily as, say, the death of Muslims or the death of atheists or the death of other groups. That, they will acknowledge that this is not the United States and so Christians could be persecuted. They tend to dismiss some of the Christianophobia that happens here in the United States, but they'll probably acknowledge that. But then they don't have to pay attention to it as much. I suspect that if this was Muslims being murdered by Christians, there'd be a great deal more attention being paid to it. In fact, having done some research on bias in media, where I looked at church shootings, where a Muslim church being shot up by a Christian looks a lot different from a Christian church being shot up by a Muslim. The media personnel paid much more attention to the Muslim church being shot by a Christian in this hypothetical that I gave them. So I do think that that is a factor. Last factor. Those who are perpetuating the crime are Muslims. When we look at Gaza, we think about who was perpetuating the crime, and I don't want to get too much into it. I know the Israelis have some claims of victimization themselves, but the victims were Muslims and the perpetrators were Jews. Let's be honest. Anti-Semitism is a thing. And a few years ago, I could say, well, it's a thing most among conservatives. That is changing. Because conservatives are more likely to have anti-Semitism, but we can't ignore that anti-Semitism has grown on the left as well. The fact that the perpetrators are not Jew, but they're Muslims, which in the framework of identity politics, being Muslim, you are seen as a victim, and therefore more leniency is given to you. So, those are three theories that I have. I'm not saying it's just one of those theories. It may be the three of them in combination with other factors. But the victims are black, the victims are Christian, the perpetrators are Muslim, I think is part of what is happening here. I have 4 playlists. In some ways, this involves all of them. I have a playlist on race relations, the victims are black. I have a playlist on Christianophobia, the victims are Christian. I have a playlist on identity politics, oppressed or oppressed. I have a playlist on white progressives, because I think the white progressives are the ones who promote a progressive identity politics. So in some ways, this story sort of brings all my playlists together, which I find interesting, because sometimes I think that I'm doing these disparate topics, but sometimes those topics come together as far as identity politics and who's oppressed and who's mistreated in our societies or our global societies, not just the United States. Anyways, these are some things to think about, and I would encourage you to maybe do some Google searches on the Nigerian situation. It does beg for our attention. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, and once again, if you like conversations like this, please come back where I can shatter some more paradigms.